Hi everyone, I'm Jose Algarin, Program Specialist for the Climate Variability and Predictability Program at NOAA, CVP, NOAA's Climate Program Office. Thank you for joining us for the fifth session of the webinar series called Decadal Variability and Predictability Studies. This is a continuation of a series of webinars for the CVP program that started several years ago. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available at the CVP website under the Webinars tab. If you missed any of the prior CVP webinars, I encourage you to view them from our website. CVP supports research that enhances our process-level understanding of the climate system through observation, modeling, analysis, and field studies. The topic of this series is the Decadal Climate Variability and Predictability Studies. The goal for these studies was CVP's contribution to the national and international research interest in this topic, especially the role of the ocean. This webinar series covers the 10 projects funded by CVP, which started in September of 2020. The goal of these modeling studies is to identify the state, mechanisms, and sources of climate predictability on the interannual to decadal timescale. The research will lead to future improvements in skillful decadal prediction systems for climate, ocean, and atmosphere. Each of the sessions will feature 2 presentations and will run until June 8, 2023. This series of presentations will share the latest results from these projects and will allow the researchers to discuss the importance of their work, outcomes, and lessons learned with a broader scientific community. We hope that you will enjoy today's talks and ask questions. Speaking of questions, if you have one for one of our presenters, please use the raise your hand feature, which you can find on the control panel for GoToWebinar. At the end of the presentation, I will unmute those who have raised their hands so that they can ask their questions using their audio. You will also need to unmute yourself after I do so. If you have audio problems, I will ask you to type your questions in the questions box, which can also be found on the control panel. Now let's get to the presentations. Our first speaker is Dr. Xian Wu. She's currently a postdoctoral research associate at Princeton University and at NOAA's Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Lab, or GFDL. Before joining GFDL, she worked as an ASP postdoctoral fellow at NCAR, where she studied decadal prediction skill and predictability in the Pacific Ocean. Dr. Wu, thank you so much for joining us. At this time, I will turn over the controls to you.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Jose. I am pleased to share our recent research on how volcanic forcing degrades multi-year to decadal prediction skill in the tropical Pacific. This work was conducted during my ASP postdoc at NCAR with partial support from the CVP-funded project led by Steve Yeager. Volcanic eruptions can affect the global climate by injecting sulfur gases into the stratosphere, where they are converted into stratospheric sulfur aerosols that modulate atmospheric radiative and dynamical processes. These volcanic impacts can be obscured by internal climate variability and are often challenging to isolate because of the short modern instrumental records and the lack of observations of stratospheric aerosol forcing before the satellite era. Although paleoclimate data and climate model simulations have been widely adopted to deduce statistically significant climate impacts of volcanic eruptions, but there are still many issues, including the disagreements among paleoclimate reconstructions and deficiencies of climate models. Due to these potential climate impacts, volcanic eruptions are expected to provide an important source of predictability for the post-eruption climate evolutions from seasons to decades However, it largely remains unknown how this volcanic forcing will affect the decadal prediction scale. Recently, a few case studies have been focusing on this topic by comparing CMIP 6 hindcasts with and without volcanic forcing for selected initialization dates right before the historical large volcanic eruptions. Here we will go beyond case studies, but compare two suites of decadal hindcasts conducted with CESM1 with and without volcanic forcing during 1954 to 2008. We first make use of the CESM1 Decadal Prediction Large Ensemble, DPLE. DPLE has 40-member forecasts that are initialized from oceanic and sea ice states that are close to observations on November 1st during each year during 1954 to 2008. The ensemble spread among the individual 40 members is created by adding small perturbations to the atmospheric initial conditions. For each initialization, these forecasts are run forward for about 10 years to make decadal predictions. DPLE is conducted under the CMIP 5 radiative forcing, including the historical volcanic aerosol forcing shown below. You can see during the historical time, the volcanic forcing is majorly contributed by the 3 large volcanic eruptions happened in the tropics, including Algon, El Chichen, and Pinatubo. We then compare DPLE with the parallel forecast sets that excludes historical volcanic forcing called DPLE NoVolc. DPLE NoVolc has a smaller ensemble size of 10. So when we compare these two ensemble predictions, we will consider their different ensemble sizes and use bootstrap method to test the statistical significance of our results. By using the ensemble prediction framework and the comparisons between DPLE and DPLE NoVolc, we can comprehensively assess the volcanic influence on near-term prediction scale over the past 60 years, including scale dependence on lead time and background conditions. We can also examine realism of simulated volcanic impacts and factors contributing to discrepancies between model and observations. First, I'm showing you the correlation scale of the detrended surface temperatures in DPLE, DPLE NoVolc, and the difference of their scale maps. Before calculating the correlation scale, we detrended both observations and forecasts to remove the effect of long-term anthropogenic climate change. And here I'm showing you the correlation scale for forecast year 1 to 5, and then the same analysis for forecast year 6 to 10 and 1 to 10. Comparing DPLE and DPLE NoVolc, we can see volcanic eruptions cause significant differences over many regions. Most prominently, the scale is degraded by volcanic forcing in the central eastern tropical Pacific, and the scale degradation is more pronounced in forecast year 6 to 10 and 1 to 10 compared to the forecast year 1 to 5. Besides the tropical Pacific, we also see significant differences in many land regions. For example, the volcanic forcing improves the scale in the South Asia and tropical Africa, but degrades the prediction scale in the South America. Our study is focusing on the tropical Pacific. It is noted that the DPLE NoVolc show fairly high scale in the Central Eastern Tropical Pacific, a region has shown long-standing low scale in the CIMIP 5 and 6 decadal hindcasts. To examine if the scale degradation in tropical Pacific by volcanic forcing is robust across different lead times and temporal averaging, I'm showing you the correlation scale of the detrended SST anomalies in the Central Eastern Tropical Pacific as a function of lead times and temporal average interval from 1 year to 10 years. The comparison of DPLE in blue and DPLE novel in orange confirm that the scale degradation by volcanic forcing in the tropical Pacific is robust from 1 year average on annual to 10-year average to decadal timescales. We also noticed some interesting features about the scale and scale difference and its independence on the verification time. For example, for forecast year 1 or 2, or forecast year 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, those lead times close to the short lead times close to the initialization, DPLE and DPLE novel are very comparable. This is because in these lead times, the scale is more controlled by the initialization rather than the external forcing. And when we go to the 3-year to 5-year average time window, we can see the scale degradation is stronger at longer lead times compared to short lead times. This is largely because the scale of DPLE decreases at longer lead times and becomes comparable to the uninitialized simulations, CESM1 large ensemble. And we find that the volcanic influence is most pronounced for the multi-year average at longer lead times. Then to understand why the volcanic forcing degrades the prediction scale, we look into the time series of the detrended SST anomalies in the Central Eastern Tropical Pacific. The black curve here is observations. The colored curves are the ensemble mean signal of model simulations. The light color shading here is the range of individual ensemble members. The vertical gray bars here denotes the statistically significant differences between the ensemble means signal from DPLE and DPLE novel. And we can see these statistically significant differences tend to occur in the forecasts that overlap with the large volcanic eruptions, denoted by the small triangles at the bottom. And the major volcanic eruptions tend to cause multi-year average tropical Pacific cooling in DPLE and makes the DPLE deviates more from the positive SST values in observations. We then zoom into the 5-year average during 1991 to 1995 following the Pinatubo eruption. Here I'm comparing the single realization observation with the ensemble mean distributions, with the ensemble distributions of model simulations. We can see the SST value in observations during the 5-year time window is about 0.2. And this observed value sits within the tail of the DPLE distribution, while the DPLE novel distribution is shifted towards the observed value. The discrepancy between the observation and DPLE could be because of the following 3 reasons. First, the cooling response to volcanic forcing in DPLE is too strong. Second, predictable internal variability arising from the initialization is too weak. However, we looked into the signal-to-noise paradox in this model forecasts. We didn't identify there is strong evidence to support the second hypothesis. Third, it could just because the observed value is dominated by unpredictable internal variability. The overall relatively higher scale in DPLE no-voc than DPLE and the better match of DPLE no-voc with observations after L-Chichen and Pinatubo suggest that the internal variability associated with slow oceanic processes might be predictable to some extent. However, this predictable component is overwhelmed by volcanic response when the volcanic forcing is introduced to the prediction system. We then look into the spatial patterns of global surface temperature response following the 3 major volcanic eruptions. In observation, we can see in the 5-year average time window following the 3 large volcanic eruptions, there is SST warming in either central or eastern tropical Pacific. This SST warming is captured by the DPLE no-voc, but not by DPLE due to the cooling response of the volcanic forcing. The pattern correlation coefficient of the SST anomalies over the 4 tropical Pacific is higher in DPLE than DPLE no-voc for both L-Chichen and Pinatubo eruptions. In these slides, we further look into why the volcanic forcing cause multi-year tropical Pacific cooling. We zoom into the monthly evolutions of SST anomalies in the central eastern tropical Pacific. Here, the black curve shows the monthly time series in observations. This tropical Pacific average index is highly correlated with the Nino 3.4 index and therefore the ENSO variability. The colored curves here shows the ensemble mean difference between DPLE and DPLE no-voc from the forecasts initialized with 10 different start dates ranging from November of 1985 to the November of 1994. And the difference between DPLE and DPLE no-voc is 0 at the very beginning of the forecasts because they are both initialized from the same oceanic states. These ensemble mean differences typically show 3 stages of SST changes in response to Pinatubo eruption, a 6-month weak negative tendency after the Pinatubo eruption started, and 1-year-long El Nino like warming tendency and a negative tendency in the next 2 years. And we find that this resultant 2-year cooling response is important to forming the multi-year average or decadal average cooling response in the tropical Pacific. To understand the processes that affect these SST tendencies, we conducted an ocean mixed layer heat budget analysis, and we integrated the ocean heat budget terms for the 3 stages. We find that the relative cooling tendency in DPLE relative to DPLE no-voc in the first stage is largely controlled by the surface shortwave reduction associated with the Pinatubo eruption. The second phase of the relative warming tendency is driven by dynamical terms suggestive of the development of El Nino, while this dynamically driven warming is damped by the thermodynamic terms. And the third phase of cooling tendency is also driven by dynamical terms, indicative the development of multi-year La Nina. However, this multi-year La Nina following neutral ENSO state deviates from a typical ENSO cycle in CESM1, in which multi-year La Nina tends to follow strong El Nino. This is because the shortwave reduction associated with volcanic forcing weakens the El Nino SST warming, but strengthens the subsequent La Nina warming. In summary, we found that the volcanic forcing significantly degrades the scale of CESM1 in predicting the trended multi-year to decadal SST variability in the Central Eastern Tropical Pacific, and we explored the underlying mechanisms. The ensemble mean DPLE hinecasts produce multi-year to decadal tropical Pacific SST cooling in response to large tropical volcanic eruptions through thermodynamic and ENSO-like dynamic processes. However, in observations, these eruptions coincided with tropical Pacific warming, which is well predicted by the DPLE NOVOC and hence is likely related to the internal climate variability. Our results suggest that model fidelity needs to be carefully considered when attributing observed ENSO or tropical Pacific decadal variability to volcanic forcing. Improved representation of volcanic response and its interaction with internal climate variability may advance decadal prediction in the tropical Pacific and associated global impacts. This study has been published in Science Advances a couple of months ago. Thank you for your time, and I'll stop here and take any questions.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Wu, for that great presentation. I'm gonna open up the floor for any questions that the audience may have. Remember, you can raise your hand using the raise your hand feature, or type your questions in the questions box, and I'll read it out loud. All right, we have two, and we'll start with Antonieta Capotondi. Let me unmute you. All right, so I'm trying to unmute. Let me. Can you unmute, Antonieta? I'm trying to, okay, yes. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Sorry. So anyway, thank you so much for the presentation. So it seems that the response to volcanic eruption, so the incorrect response of volcanic eruption is a pretty quite a big shortcoming for this model. Do you know what other models, how other models perform in terms of the tropical response to volcanic eruptions? Is it a common problem to climate models, or it's just maybe the way the CSM1 behaves?
Yeah, thank you for the great question. Our study is limited to CSM1, but there is an ongoing work looking to the multimodal hinecasts and focusing on the role of volcanic eruptions. There is a large spread among different models. And we find that CESM1 tends to have a too strong stratospheric temperature response to volcanic eruptions compared to other models. So that might be one of the reasons why the model tends to have too high sensitivity in the tropical Pacific to the volcanic response.
Thank you.
All right, next question is from Timothy Del Sol. Go ahead. Can you unmute, Timothy? Okay, he typed the question. Oh, I'm clicking, but it's not working. Let's try again. Okay, there you go.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. This is a very interesting talk. I somehow missed this result, so I'm really glad to have seen this. My question is about your possible explanations for this problem, for the degradation due to the volcanoes. You have a slide that shows the time series and then possible explanations. But I guess my reaction is that actually your time series kind of show that none of those explanations work. So for instance, in the when I look at this time series, there are some cases where you have a cold observed anomaly, and then the model is not cold enough. So you could argue the cooling response is not strong enough. Whereas in other cases, there's a warm anomaly, and if you had a strong volcanic response, it would make it worse. So I see in this one time series, if you were to tune the volcanic forcing to make it stronger, it would make some cases better, but other cases worse. So it seems to me that that can't be the explanation. I kind of think that a possibility you didn't list here specifically is that your model is not getting a strong enough ENSO. So when you initialize the model, you're trying to capture the ENSO, but then it's just not strong enough. And so that's why you're not capturing those big excursions in the black curve. That's sort of my reaction to that, but I don't know if you had any response to any of that.
Thank you for your comments and questions. It like our hindcast during our hindcast period, we only have like 3 large volcanic eruptions. This limited of observations, sample sizes of volcanic eruptions is also a limitation of our study. And also other studies on volcanic forcing.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I'm thinking of like that 1970 area where you have a strong cold anomaly in the observations, but not in the model. So, but your number one possible reason is the cooling response is too strong. Someone could argue, oh, it's not strong enough in 1970. So I'm thinking that that explanation is not quite fitting, is my point there.
Yeah, during the time period in 1970s, we can see the volcanic forcing in the model is not that strong. So we cannot really say the cooling observed in observations is driven by volcanic forcing. And actually, we discussed why including volcanic forcing causes a slightly warmer response in DPLE relative to DPLE no-voc in this period. This is an artifact of the drift correction processes. If we look into the raw time series in DPLE and DPLE no-voc from the forecasts, there is no significant differences between them. However, because we are doing drift correction processes, we remove the lead time dependent climatology, which is overall colder in DPLE than DPLE no-voc due to the volcanic forcing. When we remove the relatively cooler climatology, we give them warmer, slightly warmer anomalies during 1970s here. So I'm not sure if the cooling response in very strong cooling response in observations is related to volcanic forcing, but it's not likely because the forcing is very small. And another thing you mentioned is if the ENSO response in CESM1 is too weak, but actually CESM1 simulates a stronger ENSO compared to observations. And also for the multi-year to decadal variability, we think the oceanic mechanisms may not be totally related to ENSO. And we find that the ENSO states in the initialization doesn't have a good correlation with the prediction for the next 5 or 10 years. So we are still working on the oceanic processes that behind the predictability in DPLE and DPLE novo. Hopefully we can answer that in our future study. Thank you.
Thanks. That's a lot of good information. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much again, Dr. Wu, for that great presentation and for those 2 questions. We have to move on now with our next presenter. He is Dr. Hu Kim. He is a project scientist in the Climate and Global Dynamics Lab at NCAR. His research interest is ocean and climate variability on various timescales and understanding its mechanisms and predictability. Dr. Kim, thank you so much for joining us today. At this time, I will turn over the controls to you.
Thanks, Jose. Looking good?
Yep, we can see your screen.
Okay, yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining my talk today. So my talk is about predictability of crochet extension. I would like to first thank my co-authors of this study, Steve Gokan from NCAR and Ping Chang from Texas A&M. I would like to thank NOAA CBP program as well for support. So in this study, we found exceptionally high skill anomaly correlation coefficient greater than 0.7 up to linear 4 in predicting the decadal crochet extension variability in the CSM decadal prediction system at an eddy resolving ocean resolution. I'm going to call this simulation HRDP, which is substantially higher than scale in the low resolution counterpart known as DPLE with 1 degree ocean resolution. The source of scale in HRDP is the westward Rossby wave propagation of initialized ocean state as found in many previous studies. But the key here is the convergence of this signal into the sharp K front in high resolution model. And the weaker scale in DPLE appears to be related to weaker westward propagation signal in this coarse resolution model and local spurious variability. I'm going to talk about later what that is. This is written and submitted. It's currently under revision. You can find preprint available at this link. So crochet extension is, of course, extension of crochet current, which is the western boundary current of subtropical gyre in the Pacific, North Pacific. Crochet extension flows eastward as a free jet after separating near the east coast of Japan around 35 north. Crochet extension varies on various time scale with implication on climate and local marine ecosystem. In particular, the observation shows pronounced decadal variability. The right plot shows the satellite, the crochet extension index generated using satellite observation by Chiu et al. So the strong positive KI means the stable, stronger northward state and vice versa for negative KI index. So if you compute the regression of SSH onto this KI, then you have very strong loading near Japan. So if you take the area average near Japan, you can basically reproduce the this more complicated index. So in many studies, people use this simple box average average KI index, and we're gonna use the similar Croce extension index in this study too. Yeah, and it has been shown in many studies that this Croce extension decadal variability is induced by westward Rossby wave propagation generated by wind stress curve forcing and resultant Ackermann pumping. It takes about 3 to 4 years to cross the basin from the central Pacific to western boundary current region. So this 3 to 4 year timescales of Rossby wave propagation suggest that Croce extension might be predictable multi-year ahead. So several studies have looked at this Croce extension predictability using from idealized to comprehensive couple models. For example, this plot shows from Joe et al. Shows the ACC correlation coefficient from linear vorticity equation from Chiu et al. Green dash line, and from GFDL sphere decadal prediction system, thick lines here against their realignances round black and observation green. So both studies suggest that KE can be predicted, skillfully predicted 4 years ahead, and the source of skill is Rossby wave propagation. But none of this study none of this model used in their study does not result fronts or eddies, which may be very important for KE dynamics. So if you look at observation, so before Croce extension peaks, you can see meridionally quite wide initial anomaly in the central Pacific here. And then the signal kind of converges into Croce extension front as it propagates westward. And Sasaki et al. Using theoretical framework argue that this propagation pattern only be captured when you consider this sharp KE front. So the question is then, can we have higher skill at an eddy or front resolving resolution? To answer this question, we use the CESM decadal prediction system at eddy resolving resolution with quarter degree in the atmosphere. And we're gonna compare the skill, K skill to similarly configured low resolution CSM system, DPLE. I don't have time to go through all the details, but I want to highlight that both HRDP and DPLE are initialized with ocean states from force ocean simulation using the same ocean and sea ice components. I'm gonna use this simulation for analysis later, and I'm gonna refer to this FOSSI H and FOSSI L. And I want to highlight also that HRDP is only available for every second start year for shorter time frame compared to DPLE. And the run length is also shorter, so analysis is restricted by the shorter and less frequent HRDP. And also the ensemble size is 10 for HRDP versus 40 for DPLE. So we need to first define Croce extension index, but because this biased Croce extension in the coarse resolution system, we need to define crucial KEI domain differently. So we first take the domain average from observation where the Decadal variability is strongest, and then compute the correlation of each SSH from bus H, bus L with observed KEI, and take the area average where the correlation is high. And the right top panel shows the time series from observation black, bus L blue, and bus H red. You can see that the correlation between phases and observations are about 0.8. But the amplitude in fuzzy L is much weaker than observation in fuzzy H. Then we compute the KEI from HRDP and DPLE. So you can see the time series here. From this time series, we can compute ACC against fuzzy first. The red is ACC from HRDP, and blue line is from ACC from DPLE. You can see the substantially higher scale greater than 0.7 or 0.6 of the linear 4 in HRDP, and in contrast, the ACC from DPLE shows only significant scale for first two lead years and drops rapidly after that. We can do the same against observation. Again, you can see significantly higher scale in HRDP compared to DPLE. And compared to previous study I just showed you earlier, the skill from HRDP is higher than GFDL sphere skill or linear vorticity equation, especially linear 3 to 4. Yeah, so then what's the source of skill? So you can see that in both observation bus H. Well, by the way, this is Hofmuller type lead-lag correlation of SSH along KEI index latitude. Yeah, you can see westward propagation signal taking about 3 to 4 years from Central Pacific to Western boundary in observation and bus H. But it takes about an year in bus L, which may be too fast to be considered as Rossby wave propagation. You can also see that this contour line shows wind stress curve anomaly. You can see that the in bus H, wind stress curve anomaly propagating westward in tandem with SSH anomalies, indicating there may be a couple interaction, but this is not predicted in HRDP, so I'll just skip this coupled interaction part. We can look at the spatial pattern of this propagation. So the plot shows the read-lag correlation from bus H left and from observation right. You can see initially meridianally large initial anomaly, and you can see this signal is converging into crucial extension front later in both bus H and observation. We can compute the similar lead-lag correlation in HRDP, but it has to be across the lag to see what's the source of predictability. So given some signal at linear 3, we compute the simultaneous correlation first at linear 3 and did the lag correlation across lead years. This is how it looks. You can see the very similar propagation pattern in HRDP. In contrast, this pattern is somewhat different in close resolution simulation, especially westward propagation is less clear, and of course there's no convergence of SSH initial anomalies as it propagates to west. So then what's the reasons for the weak scale or weaker propagation signal in DPLE or close resolution simulation? We can find a hint in the subsurface temperature structure. So the top three panels shows the zonally average temperature over the Croce extension index domain regressed onto each KEI. You can see in both observation FOSSI-H, the center of action is in the subsurface near the Croce extension axis. So this indicates that this temperature variability is dominated by vertical thermocline displacement associated with Rossby wave. And this is reasonably predicted up to Lydia 4, consistent with KI predictability. In contrast, in FOSSI-L, the center of action is near surface and placed north of Croce induction core, and consistent with weaker predictability, this is not well predicted as well. So in FOSSI-L, K variability appears to dominate by suspect, which is not in observation. Operation temperature variability and westward wave signal is weak, as you can see, lack of signal in the subsurface. So if you look at the horizontal map of at 100 meters from FOSSI-L, then you can see eastward propagating signal from east coast of Japan. So to further look into what's really happening in close resolution simulation, we utilize same FOSSI-L simulation, but force with interannually varying momentum forcing only, FOSSI-LM, and interannually varying buoyancy forcing only, FOSSI-LB. So if the FOSSI-L is forced with winds only, then we can see the similar propagation signal. But when model is forced with only buoyancy forcing only, then there's kind of eastward propagating signal up here. So when you force model with both interannually varying forcing, then you get kind of mixed signal. So in summary, so we think that the wind-driven Rossby wave signal is converging into the crucial extension front in high-res simulation. So the signals are strong in this high-res simulations that leads to high predictability. And there's no spurious local variability in the simulation. On the other hand, Rossby wave the propagating signal is there, but it's not converging into sharp front because of the coarse resolution. And so the signal propagating, westward propagating signal is weak. At the same time, there is spurious local near surface ocean variability, which dominates this crucial extension variability. And because of this eastward propagating signal, scale is lower. Okay, I'm almost done, but I would like to point out that so we don't have a VGC field in our HRDP, but the previous study by Leon et al. Shows quite good correspondence between SSH propagating signal and operation nutrient and operation zooplankton biomass. So I think if we have a BGC field, we would have reasonable material prediction skill in biological field as well. And yeah, so given very expensive computational resource required to run this kind of high-res prediction system, it would be interesting to see how many ensemble members are needed to obtain comparable skill we have with 10 members. So we randomly resample HRDP, KEI, and then compute here the distribution and the ensemble average as a function of lead year. I'm only showing here lead year. Oh no, so as a function of ensemble size, and I'm only showing such for lead year 2 and 4. So answer is not simple. So in summary, for short-term prediction, for example, 1 to 2 years, a small ensemble size, 3 to 5 members seems to be okay. But for long-term prediction, 4 to 5 years, for example, then yeah, a large ensemble size, more than 10, seems to be necessary. Okay, I'll stop here with this take-home message again. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kim, for that great presentation. I'm going to open up the floor now for questions from the audience. Remember, you can raise your hand using the raise your hand feature, or you can type your question on the questions box. And we have one from Shayu. Let me unmute you, and please unmute yourself on your side. All right, go ahead.
Hi, Kim. Thanks for the presentation. I have one question. So, what do you mean by the Rossby convergence into that K region, and why this high resolution has that convergence of the Rossby, why the low resolution version doesn't have it?
Okay, yeah, thanks for the question. That goes to the study by Sasaki, and also in this study, he argued that the Rossby wave is guided by Kuroshio current, the front itself. So if you look at the observation, well, it might be better to look at my version of plot. Sorry. Yeah, so initially when the wind stress curve forcing has a large scale, so initial SSH normally is quite wide, but as they propagate westward, it kind of converges into Kuroshio extension index. No, sorry, Kuroshio extension front, which is very sharp in high-res simulation. Sorry, let me go focus. So this contour here shows the mean SSH. So in high-res and observation, the gradient of SSH is sharp here, but in fuzzy L, gradient is weak. So in fuzzy L, this signal does not converge into a meridionally sharp front. It just go westward broadly. Does it answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right, we have a question from, I saw a hand up. Nicholas Schneider, maybe? Go ahead, Nicholas.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Hi.
Well, thank you very much for that talk. Very nice. I just have a question regarding the one topic
that you glanced over that covariation between the sea surface height or thermocline depth anomalies and the wind stress as they covary together towards the west. And I wonder whether you looked at that, whether that's indeed a signal of atmospheric feedback, maybe just in the boundary layer, or whether that's a case of stochastic forcing, where you get the largest response in the sea surface height if the wind stress curl forcing happens to move to the west at the same speed as the SSH variations.
Okay, so not sure if I understand your question correctly, but so yeah, the Fuzzy H simulation suggests there's kind of the propagation of wind stress curve along SSH anomalies. But in prediction system, that doesn't happen. So the HIDP cannot predict this wind stress curve coupled forcing. But nevertheless, HIDP predict SSH signal quite well. So I think it can help to maintain the amplitude, or can intensify the signal, but not necessarily the key for the prediction, as it predict quite skillfully without such feedback. But yeah.
Is it atmospheric feedback, or is it a stochastic resonance?
Oh, so you're asking whether this is stochastic or
Right, correct. So in stochastic, so actually feedback is obvious, right? That you have somehow the atmosphere responds to the SSH signals. With the stochastic forcing, you would argue if you have simply a random excitation of SSH, then you get the largest response if the atmospheric forcing happens to move at the same speeds as the SSH and give you a resonant forcing. So in the end result, you would see a correlation between the two, simply because one happens to be in resonance, gives the largest response when it's in resonance.
Okay. Yeah. I haven't carefully looked at how they're kind of coupled and or propagate together, but I'll take a look at it. But yeah, I don't have a clear answer to your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Nice talk.
All right, we have a third question on the chat from Matt Newman. Is changing aerosol forcing part of the hindcast? And if so, is that involved in any of these differences?
Yeah, in the Decadal prediction system, there is aerosol forcing. But the time scale of this variability is about 10 years. So I don't think the aerosol forcing contributes to this predictability difference, I think.
All right, and we have one last question from Antonita Capotondi. Unmute you. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Jose, and thank you again for the presentation. So looking at this Hofmöller diagram that you have here, so actually this is related to the question that Shayu asked at the beginning. So if you look at this Hofmöller diagrams, you see that in the low resolution case, the main difference is that the Rossby waves propagate faster than in the high resolution case. So and that can be due maybe to ocean stratification changes or to the surface forcing, maybe, also in relation to what Niklas asked. so I don't quite understand where the high resolution enters into place. And unless maybe the high resolution that you have near the front in the Western Pacific can maybe affect the atmospheric circulation and affect the forcing of the Rossby waves themselves.
Yeah, so the Rossby wave propagation is not actually faster in coarse resolution simulation. It rather, so if you look at
from the baseline, it does seem faster when you had the dashed lines showing the propagation. It seemed that it's more, yeah. Okay, sorry.
you referring to these contours,
yes.
or well,
yes,
that's
two
correct.
panels. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so SSH is our shading. So when the Fossey L is force with interannually varying momentum forcing only, then we can see similar propagation signal. So there is actually Rossby wave westward propagation in coarse resolution simulation. But because of kind of spurious variability emanating from east coast of Japan, driven by buoyancy forcing. So when you have those forcing together, then it looks like propagating faster, because one going west, one going east, and the combination of these two make looks faster. Yeah.
Yeah, but is this spurious anomalies in the Western Pacific due to low resolution?
I think so. So there, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to understand why the resolution matters. So if the problem is this very rightmost panel where you have this eastward propagating anomaly emanating from the Kuroshio. So are those spurious anomalies due to the fact that this model has a coarser resolution, or is just maybe something else?
So I think, yeah, this eastward propagation signal is related to coarse resolution. Actually, Nanaka, I forget the institution, done a couple of studies showing this, the characteristics of eastward propagating signal. So he actually found the stronger signal coarse resolution than high-res signal. And I have looked at the SSA, temperature or SSH variance from CSM 1 and 2 couple simulation, and I do see actually stronger, similar spurious signal in coarse resolution simulation. And if you look at the subsurface temperature anomalies, then you don't see at all this near surface temperature variance in observation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. Yeah.
All right, and with that, we are over time, so we had to leave it there. We would like to thank you, everybody, for joining us for this set of presentations in our series of the Decadal Climate Variability and Predictability Studies. I would like to thank today's presenters, Dr. Wu and Dr. Kim, for taking the time to share their work with us. The recording of today's webinar will be available within the next week on our website, cpo.noaa.gov/cvp. We hope to see you and that you will join us next Thursday, May 25th, for our next presentation. And let me show you the next week's speakers. We'll have Timothy Del Solo from George Mason University. His title is "Do Models Correctly Simulate Atlantic Variability?" And Dennis Volkov from NOAA's AOML lab, Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation Increases Flood Risk along the United States Southeast Coast. So this is next Thursday, May 25th. So we have a week and a half of a break, and then we'll return next Thursday. Again, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you to our speakers, and we'll see you next week, next Thursday, May 25th.
Thank you, Jose.